There was over 150 people investigated, like suspects. Over 50 men and women confessed to the crime. So not only have you dialed it up, so you dialed it up in the media, now you have all these people investigated, you have 50 men and women confessing, saying like, I did it. Which, you know, you don't want to just like blow everybody off. So all this time was wasted chasing after all this ridiculousness because people were reading it in the paper and they were taking it to the next level. There was little to no evidence to back up any of the people at all that confessed. And to this day, no one's ever been charged with Elizabeth's murder. By the spring of 1947, her case had become a cold case. Sergeant Phineas Brown was one of the lead detectives on the case, and he really blamed the press for compromising this investigation. He said that they reported on details that were not true, that were unfounded, tons of rumors, and it just made it too hard. Again, because then it's going to cause people to be coming out of the woodwork and confessing random stuff and wasting the police time with nonsense because of stuff that they read in the media. In September of 1949, a grand jury convened to discuss the inadequacies of the LAPD's homicide unit, a lot to do with their failure to find any credible leads with regard to Elizabeth's case. Most of the cases that were cited in this sort of like grand jury hearing were unsolved murders of women and children. It had spanned like over the last 7 years, and Elizabeth was one of them. They were kind of like, look, even if you put that case aside, there's these unsolved murders, most of women and children. Like, what is going on? There's so many theories. Like, there's so many theories. Like, just me researching the theories part of stuff was so confusing. Some of them I just cut out completely because it just got so like ridiculous. So I'm gonna go through the theories. I am gonna have to read my notes on this. They're very in-depth, very confusing. But I just want to talk about the theories of suspects and things that happen that are still currently on the table as potential real leads to what happened. There are a few suspects that are still sort of under investigation and conversation with various authors and experts in the case. There is a list of current potential people who actually did this that are still in circulation, that are still in debate currently. So there was a whole, 150 suspects prior, but the list has now been narrowed down to Walter Bailey, Norman Chandler, who there was a biographer, Daniel Wolfe. He claimed that Chandler had actually gotten short pregnant at some point. Leslie Dillon, Joseph A. Dumas, I believe it's pronounced, Artie Lane, who's also known as Jeff Connors, Mark Hansen, Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, George Hill Hodel, Hodel's friend Frank Saxton, George Knowlton, Robert M. Red Manley, who was the person that she had been essentially having an affair with and had dropped her off the day that she disappeared, Patrick S. O'Reilly, and Jackson Anderson Wilson. So that's now the short list of all the people that could have been involved. I'm going to talk about a few of these, sort of give my idea of what might have happened. So one of the first theories is that crime authors, as well as a detective from Cleveland, his name was Peter Marlowe, or Mirlo, they thought that there was a link between Elizabeth's murder and the Cleveland Torso murders. And those took place in Cleveland, Ohio. I have never looked into this. Those murders happened between 1934 and 1938. And as a part of the investigation that they were doing on these Cleveland Torso murders, they were looking at cases potentially before that time period and right after that time period that could have been linked. And that's how they brought Short's murder into the fold. The LAPD, when they were going through all of these different leads and theories and tips and everything, they actually did look into the potential for a connection, and they did not find a relationship at all between the two cases. In 1980, new evidence had surfaced that implicated the former Cleveland Torso murder suspect. His name was Jack Anderson Wilson, also known as Arnold Smith. And he was investigated by Detective John P. St. John in relation to Short's murder. So they found that he was connected with these torso murders, and so then they did decide to investigate him specifically to see, now that they had someone connected with those, could he have been connected with Short's murder as well? The detective, St. Clair, did say that he felt that he was the murderer of Short, and he was close to being able to arrest him for that. But Wilson died in a fire in February 4th of 1982. So he was obviously never arrested for that. The series Unsolved Mysteries highlighted this connection in 1992. So then the media, obviously gained more interest in the case and the fact that he could potentially have killed Elizabeth Short as well. It was claimed that the person that reported on that, the biographer at the time, did know that the killer for the Cleveland torso murders and Elizabeth were the same killer. I don't know. I've not found anything that says that was true or false or what have you. One of the more recent and bigger connections that have come out is that there's a crime author. His name is Steve Hodel. His father was George Hill Hodel. He claimed that his dad was the killer of Elizabeth Short, and he also said that his dad had killed a child named Suzanne Deegan in 1946 and dismembered her as well. George Hill Hodel was a notorious doctor. Part of his suspicion for him doing this was his own fault, because he had made a comment that whoever dismembered the body the way that they did and sort of drained it and things like that would have had to have medical training, and he was a doctor and had medical training. The years after her body was found, his house had been bugged because they had thought that he was doing all sorts of illegal activity, not even necessarily related to Elizabeth, but just all this illegal stuff. They thought that he was performing illegal abortions there, and they thought that he had been paying law enforcement off. He was extremely wealthy, and he had been heard saying in these tapes or these surveillance recordings that he had killed her and that they were never going to be able to catch him. He was never charged, and he actually did flee the country, and he passed away after he fled the country. So he was never charged. He was never, brought to justice if he did do this. His son, who's the crime reporter Steve Hodel, is a retired LAPD detective. He believes that his father was the killer, and he believes that there's proof in his father's home to say that actually happened. In 2014, the house and the grounds were searched for evidence of remains or what have you. I mean, that just seems like such a long time to be searching home. So many decades. I can't even imagine what you could find. Another person thought that Elizabeth's murder was connected to a series of other murders called the Chicago Lipstick Murders. And Captain Donahue of the LAPD, he stated publicly that he believed that those two cases were connected, likely connected. Some of his evidence is, to me, a little reaching, but he was saying he feels like part of the reason that he thinks it's connected is because her body was found on Norton Avenue. Norton Avenue is 3 blocks west of Degnan Boulevard, and Degnan was the last name of the girl that was killed from Chicago. Again, I think it's a little reaching. He also said that there were striking similarities between the letters and notes and things that were sent to the newspaper regarding Elizabeth's murder and what was on Degnan's ransom note. He said that the handwriting was unusual and related because the person that wrote in a mixture of capital and lowercase letters. I'm assuming meaning not where it should be capitalized, but a combination within one word. He also said that the ransom letter and then the Black Dahlia letters had a misshapen P, the way that they wrote the P was misshapen, but it was similar in both situations. There was somebody that was convicted of the Dignan murder, and it was a convicted serial killer, and his name was William Herons. And he was initially arrested at age 17 for breaking into a residence close to where the little girl lived. And he claimed that he was tortured by police, that he was forced to confess, that he was made a scapegoat for her murder, for the little girl Dignan's murder. And although he was convicted of it, he said that he didn't do it. He actually died in jail on March 5th, 2012 at the age of 83, still in prison, still saying that he had not killed the little girl, nor did he kill Elizabeth. The last two people that we're going to talk about in terms of potential murderers is there was a book from John Gilmore in 1994, and it was called Severed, The True Story of the Black Dahlia Murder. And it suggested that there was a connection between Elizabeth's murder and that of Georgette Burdorf, or Bauerdorf. She was a socialite that was strangled to death in her West Hollywood home in 1944. Gilmore suggested that Short's employment at the Hollywood canteen, where she was waitressing, was the same place that Bauerdorf worked as a hostess. He thinks that this could be a connection between the two women and potentially between their murders. But the problem is that nobody can confirm whether or not Elizabeth even actually worked at the Hollywood canteen. So, I mean, it's hard to say that there is a connection if she never even worked there. And the last one that I want to talk about is in 2017, the book Black Dahlia, Red Rose by Pugh Eatwell focuses on Leslie Dillon, who was a bellhop, a former mortuary's assistant, and his associates were Mark Hansen and Jeff Connors. So, this is super convoluted. So what they're trying to say is that Sergeant Phineas Brown, who was the detective, that he was corrupt, that he was somehow involved with all these people, and that they were robbing hotels or something, and that somehow Elizabeth found out and she was murdered to keep her quiet. He even goes so far as to say that he believes that she was murdered at the Astor Hotel, and that the owner said that on January 15th, 1947, they found a room in one of the motels covered in blood and fecal matter. So there's a lot of dispute that even occurred, or that that was connected in any way. The author is working on a documentary and a revision of this book, and it's supposed to be out the fall of 2018. So I don't know, I'll have to check that out and see what she has to say. So let's get into my theories. Just overall blanket statement, I believe that whoever killed her was intimately involved with her in some way. Either was involved with her or wanted to be involved with her. And like I had said prior, the way that her body was mutilated and then left and to be discovered, I just really think it shows someone, in my opinion, who is very bold, very arrogant, and really not in fear of getting caught. I also think it was obviously purposeful of where she was left, because they weren't trying to hide her. They put her body on full display to be discovered. I think that they even wanted her to be humiliated in death. Maybe because she somehow rejected that person or humiliated them in some way, but I do feel like that was purposeful how she was left. I also don't think that this was their first murder. She was missing for several days. I do believe that she had been tortured for at least some of that time. I don't think they just all of a sudden did all of this stuff to the body their very first time killing. So I believe that this person probably could have been more confident that they wouldn't have got caught because they had done it before and not got caught. I mean, that being said, I just want to go back to some of the people that were indicated. So in terms of Leslie Dillon and the whole police corruption, and she knew too much and that's why she was killed, I don't find that to be super credible, in my opinion, because of how her body was left and found. If you're a corrupt police officer and you're in this whole like scam to like rob hotels and things like that, the last thing you want to do is kill a witness and then have her, you know, her murder be front page news for a huge amount of time. Like, you want to keep people quiet. You don't want to just be like, oh, hey, you know, they had no idea to know that if they had done that, that wouldn't have brought stuff straight to them. So I don't know. I don't think that that's what happened in that case. I don't see a huge connection between some of these other murders, like serial killer murders, especially it's like so weird that all these are like in Chicago and this and that. So it's like, I'm going to kill all these people in Chicago, then all of a sudden I'm going to go to LA. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because serial killers definitely move around, especially when they feel like the heat's on them. But I just don't see a connection. Like, one of these was a kidnapping essentially either gone wrong, or like there was a ransom note involved. So you're sitting here saying how you're going to have a ransom note and you're killing a young girl, then all of a sudden you're killing someone who's older, in a really grotesque, gruesome way. Like, I just don't see that those two crimes are connected in any way. It's just not the same MO. The one killer potential suspect that I have a hard time discounting is that of George Hill Hodel. And this is why I say this. I mean, like, when your own son thinks that you're the killer, like, that to me is something where it just, like, makes my ears prick up. The other thing is that he had medical training. He could have done the physical damage to her body that she suffered. The other thing that really stands out is the fact that if she was missing for that time, she would have had to been somewhere, and she would have had to been somewhere where no one like would see or would hear. Like, if she was tortured, she would have had to been in somewhere where people weren't going to hear her. He had a huge house, he had a mansion, he had tons of money. He was already being investigated because, you know, he potentially was paying off police officer and corrupt. Like, a murder like this, I definitely feel like people know, and potentially people were paid off, or the person that did it is so scary that they're afraid too. I mean, geez, like, look what happened to Elizabeth. You're not going to be like, oh, hey, I know who did that. Like, there was going to be a lot of fear involved. And the fact that for so long this person was never caught, it would just reiterate the idea that this person was untouchable. He also had sort of that arrogance about him that would have made it possible for him to do a murder like this, put her out in the open, not even care. His connection with her, I don't know that that's ever been shown. Did he just happen upon her? I don't think that's the case. I don't think he just like randomly chose someone. I think he knew her somehow, some way. He had met her somehow, some way. Maybe he tried to approach her and she just wasn't having it. Or, you know, like some serial killers like purposely target people who they think are less moral. You know, so there's serial killers that target prostitutes simply because they see them as less moral, so they don't see them as even being as human. So maybe he saw her out, and maybe they were partying in similar places, and maybe he knew somebody who had an affair with her or what have you, and just sort of saw her as this representation of the things that he hated or loathed. Or, you know, maybe he thought he could approach her because he obviously had money and power, and if she were to like refuse him, that could have taken it to the next level. I mean, all this is a conjecture, of course, but then the other thing that like he fled the country and he had been, you know, investigated for all these other things, it just to me feels like there's something more in there. That's all I have on this case. I mean, it is a lot, and I appreciate you sticking around. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Appreciate you sticking around. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. The next case in this series is going to be that of Richard Ramirez, who was known as the Night Stalker, was also related to the Cecil Hotel. What are your theories? Like, what are your thoughts on this case? Like, there's so many ways to go. I guess my theory was just more focusing on what type of person would have done this, not necessarily honing in on one suspect, although I think there's one that is more likely than the others. So I really want to know what your thoughts are, and I hope you come back for my next video. I'll see you later. Bye.